I never thought that the woman I had promised to spend the rest of my life with would leave me alone on a hospital bed in the middle of contractions. It wasn't a doctor or a nurse. Tanya stood by the doorway like she wasn't there. She had her arms folded across the designer coat I bought last winter, and her lips pressed together in a line that I knew meant it was over. "I can't afford to support a jobless man anymore," she told me. Her voice was very cold. "Get out." I remember blinking through the pain in my spine that felt like a burning rope, and the sweat on my forehead. I thought I heard her wrong. I thought she was joking and trying my patience because I was having a crazy hormonal time. She wasn't, though. It was clear in her eyes. The eyes that used to get soft when I put my hand on her stomach at night and told her unborn child dreams. Those eyes were now like ice, hollow and dead. "Tanya, now is not the time." As I tried to breathe, I held on to the bed railing as another contraction started to hurt me. "Please." That being said, she was already walking and turning. Watched as her heels clicked on the linoleum floor. The floor was red like her anger and sharp like her silence. I looked at the spot she had just occupied and hoped she would turn around again, even though my stomach hurt and I couldn't breathe. The door didn't open again, though. It shut with a click. That was the last sound she sent me. The nurse came back a short time later, happy and unaware that the room had turned into a graveyard. "Okay, Kieran. You're making great progress. We'll soon have a child here." There was a bitter silence in my mouth that made me nod weakly. Tanya had already left, but I didn't tell her. I didn't want her to feel sorry for me. I didn't want to feel like a news story, a safety story, or one of those stories nurses tell each other during the night shift. For my son and the promise of something better, I wanted to get through this. Tanya had no idea about the bitter irony either. That day, less than 24 hours before, I got $30 million from an inheritance. She didn't know that. My uncle had finally died. He was the one who raised me after my parents died in a car accident. Even though I was still sad, his last letter to me wasn't. He thought about this for years. He gave me all of his money and property, the accounts, the trust, the company shares, and about $30 million. Enough to make sure you never have to worry again, and to give this child a life. Tanya did not ask me how I was following his death. She didn't sit with me while I was sad. It seemed like she only cared about money when she asked me if I had applied for any new jobs. I was going to tell her that night, after the baby was born. The hospital room was warm and full of happiness, and I could picture him holding him together. Then I would say it. Tanya said today is a new day with lots of changes. But she left before hearing it. That was the only thing that changed. The hours went by like dreams with no edges. Bodies parts like bones and blood fought over who was in charge. Like the nurse said, I pushed through it, cried through it, and breathed through it. Finally, after being alone for a long time, Ezra came. My son. The room was clean, bright, and buzzing with the sound of quiet victory. The nurse put him in my arms, and he cried so hard that it looked like the sky had broken. When I looked down at his face, I saw all the love I had lost and all the strength I would need. I said his name, Ezra, in a whisper. He looked up at me like he got it because it sounded old and powerful. Tanya is still not here. The nurse looked around in a strange way. When asked, "Is your wife on her way back in?" I replied, "She won't be," and didn't say anything else. For too long I held Ezra. I asked myself, what was the point? What would it change? I could remember the shape of his nose, the curls that were already starting to form on the edge of his head, and the way his fingers curled when they touched mine. It was shaking when I changed his diaper, cleaned his skin, and held him against my bare chest like they taught us in prenatal classes. I promised to keep my word. We wouldn't need her at all. I had no idea what the days that were coming would be like. I didn't know how many times I'd cry at night, think about what she said, and wish I'd seen the signs sooner. But I only knew that at that time. He had me, I had him, and Tanya only had her absence. The papers came afterward. The proof of birth. Name of your dad? The nurse asked. David Ashcraft-Toft. I made it clear. Mom. I took a break. Please just mine. The nurse looked at her and raised an eyebrow. I signed where they told me to. There was no party or balloons. There was only ink, silence, and a baby who deserved better than what she left behind. My arm was touched by the nurse. Would you like to call someone? Tell them he's here. I turned my head away. The person who should have known was already asleep on my chest. He took a brave, short breath. When Tanya left, that's when my life began. Not hers, not ours, not mine, not his. Tanya and I met in our second year of college. It was the day my life stopped being easy, so I remember it very well. With my headphones on, I was in the library, surrounded by engineering books and empty coffee cups. I saw her walk by me in a red leather jacket and perfume that smelled like lemons and heat. She sat across from me, and at first didn't even look my way. Then, as I turned the page to talk about fluid mechanics and hydraulic machines, she looked up and told me, "You look like you're solving the world." I just looked at her blankly. I said with a half smile, "Trying to." She cocked her head and smiled. "Tell me when you're ready." That was Tanya. She was brave, hot, and a little risky. She didn't sit around and wait for life to come to her. She looked for it and told it to sparkle. I was the other way, structured and focused. My uncle taught me to value honesty, hard work, and modesty. Back then I had 2 jobs. To pay for rent and school. I work as a barista in the morning, and as a cleaner in the evenings. That's what she said she loved about me. They told me I was built differently, and that my goal was hot. A long time ago, I believed her. After 6 months, we moved in together to a small apartment off campus that had floorboards that creaked and a fridge that made noise every time we opened it. In the morning, I'd make toast and eggs. She would dance barefoot to old R&B music while she brushed her teeth. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. She would read fashion blogs on the couch while I looked at blueprints and wiring diagrams. She had dreams that were full of designer tags, and I had dreams that were full of schematics and spreadsheets. She said she didn't mind the fight because it made us stronger. I held on to that even when I had to work 2 shifts and miss classes. I thought we were building something worth all the work. Even when I got home, and she was complaining that our space wasn't big enough. The turning point came years after I graduated, when I got a job at a good tech company. This was after we got married at City Hall with gold bands on our hands. Things were stable for a while. I paid her bills, sent her flowers as a surprise, and planned trips for the weekend that we barely had time to take. She started a blog about styling, got clients, and posted pictures of us all smiling with wine glasses in our hands. People told us we had goals. The funny stopped overnight, though, and I came home with a cardboard box instead of a paycheck. That's when things started to go bad. It was quiet at first. I could tell Tanya was upset by the way her smile shrunk. The way she sighed louder than needed when I told her about job applications. I saw that she was becoming more interested in high-end panels and networking events. She was obsessed with being seen, admired, and followed. I cooked more, cleaned more, and even helped her shoot content for her brand to stay useful. That being said, her eyes lost another spark of respect every day I was out of work. Then the jab started. Little things were said in everyday conversations that were like poison mixed with honey. Men don't just hang out at home and watch someone else's baby grow. You might have done better studying money instead of whatever it was. What are you giving me now, Kieran? Vibes don't pay the rent. It was painful. I knew she meant what she said, not just what she said. The drive she used to admire in me had turned into anger. I wasn't her golden ticket anymore. It was her old pass. There were cracks in my heart that I tried not to show. She didn't see that I was trying by applying for jobs, networking, and doing contract work from home. She only saw lack. The most burning part. I had planned to ask her to marry me again. Not by law. We were already married, but not in a religious or emotional sense. I wanted to say our vows again, to start over and make it real again. I had even chosen a sapphire ring, just because it looked cool, not because it was flashy. It made me think of the sky at night during our first camping trip. The one where she said, "Being with you makes me feel safest." But that wasn't true anymore. I've turned into a sign of her sadness, a man who is only good at what he doesn't have. She never asked me what I was doing. No one ever asked me how many hours I spent revising my resume, or how many emails telling me I didn't get the job. She did not wait for me to do well. She didn't think I would. I got the news about the inheritance 3 days before Ezra was due. I was shocked when my uncle's lawyer called and said, He wanted you to have it all. You earned it. I thought about how proud my uncle would have been, and how I could show Tanya the trust papers, the wire transfers, and the portfolio balances. I could see her tears, her relief, and how she'd jump into my arms and say she's sorry she ever doubted me. But I hesitated. I wanted the timing to be just right. I decided to surprise her at the hospital with our son, and then give her the life she always wanted, a fresh start. She didn't wait to read it. She left me in the worst time of my life, not knowing that the best time was almost here. She didn't know she was leaving a millionaire, and the man who was going to give her everything. But she did. I didn't cry, scream, or chase her. Instead, I held my son and whispered, "She left, little man. But we're still here," and that was enough. The letter arrived on a Thursday, and I remember it because I had just come back from a walk with Ethan asleep in his carrier, pressed against my chest. The air was crisp and warm, like early spring. I needed that walk, with the wind on my skin, and the reminder that the world was still turning, even though mine had stopped just days before. A big cream-colored envelope with the gold seal of Harland and Pritchard, my uncle's longtime law firm, was tucked under a stack of circulars and baby product flyers. My stomach tightened. I knew what it was. I'd been expecting it in a vague, unspoken way ever since the call about his death. But holding it in my hands made it real. "You're about to find out who helped raise your dad," I whispered as I sat down at the kitchen table that Tanya once told us to get rid of, because it wasn't modern enough. I put Ezra in his bassinet next to me. His little fists flexed in his sleep, and I touched his cheek with the back of my knuckle. And how much he believed in us. I slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a thick stack of legal papers, all neatly clipped and tabbed. But right at the top was the handwritten letter from 2 weeks before he died. "Kieran, if you're reading this, I'm finally free of this failing body. Do not cry for me. You brought me more happiness than most dads do. You were the son I never had, even if other people didn't see it. I've seen you struggle with honor, work with honesty, and love with loyalty. I never had much to give you before, but now I can leave you something that fits the man you are. Everything in the Ashcraft Trust portfolio is yours, all $30 million. Not just because you're related to me, but because you earned it. Don't waste it trying to prove yourself to people who never really saw you. Use it to build something and raise that boy well. Remember that, James." I was stunned. I read the letter 3 times, squeezing the edges so hard that I made folds in the paper. $30 million cash on hand, stock holdings, and property deeds all mine. I wasn't broke or failing. And I wasn't the person Tanya said I was when she left. I had become everything she said she wanted, and everything she used to admire. I felt a deep sense of irony in my chest. I had been waiting for that announcement, holding on to it like a surprise proposal, or something beautiful to share when we were back together. I had imagined giving her this letter, and sitting our son on her lap while reading it. I thought she would cry. I thought she'd hug me and tell me she never doubted me, but she did. She left before I could tell her the news. All she left with was a mean sentence, and the sound of her heels clicking as she left me behind. She didn't ask why I was calm that week, why I hadn't freaked out about the bills, or why I didn't fight when she stopped looking at me. She made assumptions, judged, and then left. I looked over the rest of the papers. Bank accounts were already set up, a private investment consultant was hired, and even a house in Fairview that my uncle used to take me to in the summers had been transferred to my name. He had planned everything, right down to the last decimal and signature. Tanya never asked, so she didn't know. I leaned back in my chair, and Ezra moved a little in his bassinet next to me. I smiled for the first time in what seemed like years. It wasn't a smug or angry smile. It was one of relief and peace, proof that I wasn't the failure people had made me feel. I had choices, power, and freedom. I looked at Ezra, who was looking up at the ceiling with the wonder of a baby, and I thought about the future. Not the fancy one Tanya lusted after, with private jets and gold-plated soap dishes, but the one that was planned. A future where Ezra would never have to see his father get hurt, and where I could take my time, heal, and leave a legacy. I carefully folded the letter back into its envelope and put it in my top drawer. I didn't want to frame it or show it off, but I did want to keep it close as proof, not just of the money, but of who I really was to the one man who could see me clearly. I looked around the kitchen, which Tanya used to call too humble. There were old cabinets, cracked tiles, and a fridge door that wouldn't open unless Ezra yanked it. But as Ezra kicked his feet and let out a soft coo, I realized I didn't need a mansion to feel rich. I had my son, I had clarity, and I had enough. Tanya didn't wait, because she didn't see the point in staying. She left right before everything changed. So I didn't have to chase her or explain anything. She'd find out on her own soon enough. The labor room was so bright that it felt fake. Like I was dropped into a play where the main character is left in the wings while the spotlight shines down on them harshly. There was a soft gray color to the walls, but under the fluorescent lights, they seemed to glow with a cold emotionlessness. Medical equipment hummed lowly next to me, with wires and monitors blinking in a rhythmic way, but I barely noticed any of it. All I could feel was the dull emptiness that spread through the room when Tanya left. In the pain, not just from the contractions, but also from the hole she left behind. Nurses came and went, making changes and offering words of support. They thought the tightness in my throat was pain instead of grief when they asked how I was doing. I nodded and whispered fine, even though nothing about that moment felt at all fine. There were long hours. I kept looking at the door, half out of habit and half out of a weak hope that maybe, just maybe she'd come back. That she'd say she was scared, overwhelmed, or confused and apologize. That her eyes would soften and she'd squeeze my hand and say, "Let's bring our baby into the world together." But the door never opened for her again. I clenched my teeth through wave after wave of pain. My forehead was wet with sweat, and the base of my neck hurt. The contractions got stronger and closer together. The nurse, I think her name was Claire, smiled at me and said, "You're doing great. Baby's almost here. Just a little longer." Okay. The next thing I did was push and push. When the last push, the one that took my last breath and all the strength out of my body, there was silence. It lasted only a second, but then Ezra's cry cut through the still air. It was raw, pure, and alive. It was a sound that cut through the pain. A sound reminded me of why I had been through it all. Claire held him in her arms, gently cleaned him, and then put him on my chest. He was warm, smooth, and perfect. His little body shook a little as he got used to being outside, and when his cheek touched my skin, the world stopped. I looked down at my son. It was already sad because of the death of one parent, but he had me. That was enough. "Hi," I whispered, holding back tears I didn't know I had. "Hi, little one." There was a small curl in his fingers as they touched my chest. His eyes were barely open and seemed to flicker with something ancient, like he knew more than I did. "I'm sorry she's not here," I said, my voice shaking. But I was, and I wasn't going anywhere. The nurses moved around me, getting paperwork ready and checking vital signs. They did it with the quiet efficiency of people who had seen too many starts and too many ends to act surprised by either. No one asked again where Tanya had gone. They didn't press the issue. Instead, they let me hold my baby. Later that night, when the initial chaos had died down and the peace had returned, I changed Ezra's diaper for the first time. My hands were shaking. While I had watched videos, read articles, and taken classes, nothing had prepared me for how delicate and real it felt at that very moment. His legs kicked and his tiny mouth yawned, and I laughed softly to calm myself down. I did it. Not perfectly, but I did it. I swaddled him as best I could, and then sat in the chair by the bed. While Ezra was lying on my chest, I could feel his body falling asleep. I looked down at him and studied every detail. The way his hair was wavy, the dimple in his chin, and the small furrow in his brow made me think he already had a lot to say. "You won't remember this," I said in a low voice, "but I will." I wanted to be mad. I wanted to rage, scream, and swear at the door where Tanya had stood. But when I held Ezra, I didn't feel angry. Instead, I felt a strange kind of clarity. Tanya had done me a favor by leaving before her absence could teach our son anger. A nurse came back with a clipboard and said, "We'll need you to sign the birth certificate. Do you want to write down the name of the mother?" I stared at the paper. Name of child, Ezra Ashcraft-Toft. Name of father, Kieran James Ashcraft-Toft. I left the mother's name blank because I didn't think she deserved it. The nurse hesitated for a second, then nodded to show that she understood. There was no judgment, just acceptance. When she left, I sat back down and looked out the window. The city lights twinkled like stars had fallen to watch Ezra sleep. I closed my eyes, let my exhaustion wash over me, and whispered one more promise. I won't let him need you because he wouldn't. He had me and I had him. And the woman who left us mid-contraction didn't just leave a hospital room. She left the best parts of her own life. I wouldn't let her come back in. The labor room was so bright that it almost felt fake. I felt like I was in a play where the main character is left in the wings, while the spotlight shines down on them from all sides. The walls were a muted gray, but the fluorescent lights made them seem to glow with a coldness that had no feelings. There was low-hummed medical equipment next to me, with wires and monitors blinking in a rhythmic way, but I didn't notice any of it. All I could feel was the dull emptiness that spread through the room after Tanya left. It hurt, not just from the contractions, but also from the hole she left behind. Nurses came and went, making changes and giving me words of encouragement, but they thought the tightness in my throat was pain instead of grief. They asked me how I was doing and I whispered fine, even though I didn't feel at all fine at that moment. The hours went by, and I kept looking toward the door, half out of habit and half out of a weak hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd come back and say she was scared, overwhelmed, or confused, that her eyes would soften, and she'd squeeze my hand and say, "Let's bring our baby into the world together." But the door never opened for her again. I clenched my teeth through wave after wave of pain. My forehead was wet with sweat, and the base of my neck hurt. The contractions got stronger and closer together. The nurse, I think her name was Claire, smiled at me and said, "You're doing great. Baby's almost here. Just a little longer." Okay. The next thing I knew, my heart was beating faster than it ever had before, and my breath was short. I pushed, and when the last push took all of my strength, there was silence for a second. Then Ezra's cry broke through the still air, raw and pure and alive. A sound that cut through the pain, and reminded me of why I had been through it all. Claire held him in her arms, gently cleaned him, and then put him on my chest. He was warm, smooth, and perfect. His little body shook a little as it got used to being outside, and when his cheek touched my skin, the whole world stopped. I looked down at my son. He was born into a world that was already missing one parent, but he had me. That was enough. "Hi," I whispered, holding back tears I didn't know I had. "Hi, little one." There was a small curl in his fingers as they touched my chest. His eyes were barely open, and seemed to flicker with something ancient, like he knew more than I did. "I'm sorry she's not here," I said, my voice shaking. "But I am, and I'm not leaving." The nurses moved around me, getting paperwork ready, and checking my vital signs. They did this with the quiet efficiency of people who had seen too many starts, and too many ends to act surprised by either. No one asked Tanya where she went again. They might have guessed. They might have known. Or maybe they saw too many fathers' ghost pregnancies to think it was the mother. No matter what the reason was, they didn't press. They let me hold my child. I changed Ezra's diaper for the first time later that night, after the initial rush had died down, and the quiet had returned. My hands were shaking. I had read articles, watched videos, and taken classes, but nothing had prepared me for how real and delicate it felt at that moment. His little legs kicked and his mouth yawned, and I laughed softly to calm down. I got it done. I did it partly right, but I did it. First, I wrapped him up as best I could. Then I sat down in the chair next to the bed that reclined. Ezra sat next to my chest. He was falling asleep, and I could feel it in his body. There was a swirl of hair on his head, a dimple in his chin, and a small furrow in his brow. I looked down at him and studied every part of him, as if he already had a lot to ask the world. I said, "You won't remember this." "I will though." I wished I was mad. It made me want to scream and swear at the door where Tanya used to stand. But when I held Ezra, I wasn't mad. In a strange way, I felt clear. Tanya helped me out. She got away before her absence could teach our son to be angry. A nurse came back with a clipboard. She said in a soft voice, "We need you to sign the birth certificate. Do you want to write down the name of the mother?" I looked at the paper. Child's name is Ezra Ashcraft-Toft. Kieran James Ashcraft-Toft, your father. The mom's name is not written here. She didn't deserve the room. The nurse thought about it for a second, and then nodded to show that she got it. Don't judge, just accept. I sat back down and looked out the window after she left. The lights of the city twinkled like the stars had come out just to watch Ezra sleep. I shut my eyes, let my tiredness wash over me, and said one more promise in my head. He wouldn't need you, so I won't let him. I had him, and he had me. The woman who left us in the middle of contractions didn't just leave the hospital room. She left the best parts of her own life behind. I wouldn't let her come back in either. The next morning, Tanya walked in just as the sky outside the hospital room turned a soft pink color. Not hurried and not sorry. She didn't cry, say sorry, or even show some concern when she walked in. Not at all. She came in with a coffee cup from the downstairs cafe, sunglasses on her head, and a signature trail of perfume that I didn't recognize. The strong, flowery, and expensive smell hit me first. Then there was the smirk, which she used when she thought she had the upper hand. She wasn't by herself, though. A tall, clean-cut man stood behind her. He looked like he just stepped out of a fashion magazine spread. He wore a navy suit, shine brown loafers, and no tie. However, a gold watch sparkled on his wrist. Tanya bought me this watch for my birthday last year. It was what I wore to our anniversary dinner. It was now sitting on this stranger's wrist like a pledge. I didn't move or say anything. I held Ezra in my arms while he was still asleep. His tiny breaths were moving up and down against my chest. I made some changes to the blanket around him and kept my eyes on Tanya. She took a sip of her coffee and sighed in a fake way. I was wrong about how good you look. I didn't answer. She looked at Ezra and then shrugged. Really cute. I still didn't say anything. I wasn't going to give her a raise to make her happy. I was not going to let her turn the silence into something strange and dramatic. That's when she did it. This is what she told the man next to her. Is my husband. Liam. What the heck? Husband? A stiff, uneasy nod was all Liam could muster. He looked back and forth between me and the baby as if he didn't know where to look. That's how he stood. A little lean back and a sudden sweat on his forehead. He was aware of a problem. I didn't tense up or turn in my stomach when Tanya said, "We got married yesterday." It was a quick courthouse thing. Very low-key. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. The cruelty, the shallowness, the shiny surface with nothing underneath. I looked back at Ezra. He stared a little and let out a soft breath. That sound grounded me. When Liam looked at me, he stopped in his tracks. Fear spread across his face like a sunrise. "Wait," he said, taking a small step forward. "You're my CEO, Kieran Ashcroft." Tanya's smirk dropped as soon as he said those words, and she turned to look at him sharply. "What are you talking about?" Liam asked. He looked at me, then at her. "You said your ex-boyfriend was a broke tech guy, but you never said he owned Ashcraft Holdings." She blinked and said, "That's not possible." I said in a steady voice, "He is your boss. Technically, your husband is your boss now, but probably not for much longer." Liam took a step back and looked at me with wide eyes. "Oh, that's right," I said. I was going to tell her about the inheritance after Ezra was born, but she left before I could. Tanya looked at me like she was seeing a ghost she hadn't finished burying. Her mouth opened and closed, and we were silent for a long time. I slowly stood up while adjusting Ezra in my arms. I pointed at Liam and said, "You married me in turn." "Nice choice," I said, complimenting Liam on his good looks. Tanya's face flushed. She tried to calm down by using that haughty tone she used when she wanted to be in charge. "Well, maybe if you had been a real man and kept a job, I wouldn't have had to tell you that. I was in labor when you left me. I cut you off. You didn't just end a marriage, you left your child. And now you want to waltz back in with a ring on your finger and a man wearing my watch." Liam took off his watch and put it on the table. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear I didn't know she was married when we started." I asked him, "Did you know yesterday?" He didn't answer. The door opened again, and a nurse walked in. "Mr. Ashcraft. Just here to check on O." Her eyes quickly picked up on the tension in the room, so I asked her, "Could you please call hospital security? We have 2 guests here who need to leave." "You're not serious?" Tanya asked. "This room is for people who belong here. You don't." Wait, can we just talk, please? The nurse nodded and left to make the call. Tanya's tone changed, and her confidence broke. I already did all the talking I needed to do, and you did the walking, she said. It was starting to dawn on Tanya that something was wrong. She looked at Ezra one more time, and for a split second, she felt like she might have felt regret. But it was too late. Security showed up minutes later, and the men in dark uniforms were too calm. They didn't touch her or raise their voices. After Liam and Tanya left, Liam didn't say a word and avoided my eyes. Tanya's heels clicked in a different rhythm this time, one of defeat. When the door closed behind them, I let out a long breath and kissed the top of Ezra's head, whispering, "Don't worry, son." The hospital room went back to being quiet when Tanya and her new husband left. It wasn't a heavy or painful silence, but a clean one, like something had been let out in peace, honest and earned, had finally found a place in the chaos. As Ezra looked up at me, his lips moved in what could have been a smile or gas, but I took it as approval. I sat down again and held him close, putting his head on my chest. For a long moment I just breathed. There was no anger or pride in my voice. There was only stillness. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket, and I reached for it to see an email from legal. "Welcome, Mr. Ashcraft. You are now the majority shareholder and have full signing rights. Please let us know if you'd like to set up your first executive board meeting." I gave a small smile. Ashcraft Holdings, the company my uncle built, was now officially mine. I was the CEO, but only in theory. In reality, I read a few more emails from trustees, financial officers, and board advisors. Some people congratulated me, but most just wanted to set up calls. It was a bustling scene, but the small, warm weight in my arms was the best thing there was. The boardroom could wait a day, but I had to be careful with my next move, because her husband Liam had just started working at our company. I remembered him from the orientation meeting 3 months ago. He was cocky, had a clean resume, and was a referral from one of our partner universities. I hadn't talked to him much. I had just signed off on his onboarding. I didn't know he was seeing my wife behind my back, which I thought was funny. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. I would not lash out or make threats. I would do what Ashcrofts do best, take care of business. I opened his personnel file, read through his credentials, and added a note that said review status. Conflict of interest pending. This did not mean that he would be fired right away. I would let the facts speak for themselves. I quickly texted the head of HR to set up a meeting about a new hire who didn't disclose a conflict of interest. I would bring proof. I then leaned back and held Ezra closer. The next morning, we were released from the hospital, and I carried my son out with a sense of completion as his car seat clicked into place. It was just him, me, and a quiet ride back to our apartment. Tanya had once decorated the nursery in sage green and gold, and her frame quotes were still on the wall. I would soon change that. Ezra slept most of the day while I moved quietly, packing her things into boxes. I didn't throw them away. I wasn't that kind of guy, but I packed with care, precision, and a clarity I hadn't felt in months. She left jewelry on the vanity, hair products lined up like she was coming back, and wedding photos on the dresser. I put them all in boxes. Her closet was empty in less than an hour, and the house felt wider without her. Not empty, just roomier, like it could breathe again. Later that night, I went to work for the first time since giving birth. When I walked in with Ezra in a soft sling across my chest, my assistant Kelsey looked surprised. "Congratulations, Kieran," she said, her voice full of warmth and surprise. "Is this Ezra?" I asked my son. She smiled bigly and said, "He's beautiful and tiny." "Like all good beginnings," I replied. The nursery and the boardroom were now close to each other. Things had changed. I went into the executive suite and logged into my terminal. The board had sent me projections and quarterly reports, but I was more interested in security footage. I asked to see employee access logs, internal messages, and activity timelines. Liam's name kept coming up in late-night check-ins, weekend projects, and video conferences with Tanya listed as a personal contact on his login credentials. It was clear that there was no scandal or press release needed. I just needed the truth, the pattern, the timeline, and proof. I wrote an internal memo asking him to resign voluntarily. The tone was professional, firm, and non-negotiable. I also included a clause offering severance if he agreed to sign a non-disparagement agreement. I didn't want any drama. I just wanted to end the matter. When I got home that night, Ezra was asleep in his bassinet next to the window. I looked down at him and saw my whole world wrapped in a cotton blanket with tiny blue stars. I brushed my hand through his hair and let out a sigh of relief. This was the new boardroom, and these were the decisions that mattered now. I sat down at my desk and opened a new document. It wasn't a will or a strategy plan. It was a letter to Ezra, a legacy. I told him about the day he was born, the silence, and how strong it was to hold him when everything else fell apart. I told him I loved him, and that he saved me. When I was done writing, I looked out the window and saw that our apartment was quiet. I wasn't the broken man Tanya thought she left. It wasn't that I was angry. I was just getting better. Tomorrow I would start over. That night, while Ezra slept curled up next to my bed, I sat at the dining table alone with my laptop open and legal documents spread out in front of me like dead soldiers. The overhead light buzzed softly, and the city hummed with the sound of passing cars and the occasional bark of an irritated dog. Inside, though, was still almost holy. I drank some water and watched the cursor blink at the bottom of the screen. The form was simple, just a checkbox and a signature, but what it meant wasn't. I clicked, and the divorce petition was filed at 9:47 p.m. I didn't do it out of anger, and it wasn't a victory. I did not feel vengeance, blare loud music, or swear under my breath. I just filed it like you would remove a rotting floorboard from a house you still wanted to save. Carefully, decisively, and with purpose. Tanya was no longer a part of the structure I was rebuilding. I then moved on to the next document, which was custody, not a war. I didn't want to drag Ezra through a battlefield of anger and courtrooms, but I was going to protect him. I was going to make sure that the woman who left her newborn son in the middle of contractions couldn't just walk back into his life whenever it was convenient or photogenic. The paperwork for the custody emergency protective order had already been made by my lawyer, Thomas Vance. I hadn't asked for it yet, but I would press that button like a steel trigger if Tanya tried to fix the situation or claim rights she didn't deserve. Next, I went through our bank accounts. I logged into every joint account we had. I knew Tanya hadn't expected me to act so quickly. She always thought I was thoughtful, cautious, and slow to act. She never realized that silence doesn't mean weakness, it means smart. First, I took her off of our credit lines as an authorized user. Then I took her off of our checking and savings accounts. Before she left, she probably used most of our emergency fund to pay for her surprise wedding. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it again. I finally changed all of her passwords for important things like banking, business, utilities, and even the smart thermostat. I locked all the digital doors and then moved on to the real ones. The next morning, I drove to our house, the one Tanya had begged for. It had an open floor plan, high ceilings, and quartz countertops. We had only lived there for a year before everything fell apart, so it felt more like a memory than a home. I parked in the driveway, and Ezra was still sleeping in his car seat behind me. I went to the front door and put the new key in the lock. The deadbolt clicked, and I walked inside. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and lavender. She must have hired someone before she left. I slowly went through each room, turning lights on and off, testing windows and checking corners. I wasn't looking for thieves. It was time for me to leave this place. Her shoes were still stacked by the door, and her makeup brushes and gloss tubes were still lined up like trophies on her vanity. I didn't touch them because I didn't need to. Everything here had lost its meaning. In the kitchen, I found the box she used to keep her jewelry in. It was mahogany, lined with velvet, and always locked. Inside were diamond earrings, 3 gold chains, and the silver bracelet I bought her for our 3rd wedding anniversary. I left them all there. Then I took out a note card, wrote my last words on it, and put it next to the box. You left me while I was in labor. Please don't forget what day that was. I won't. I shut the box and walked away without looking back. I didn't slam the door, stomp my feet, or scream into the wind. I just locked it behind me, reset the security system, and walked back to the car. When I opened the door, Ezra softly stirred. I reached back and adjusted his blanket, smiling at his tiny, scrunched-up face. "You're safe now," I whispered. Back at the apartment, I got Tanya's first call since her dramatic return from the hospital. I let it ring the first and second times, but on the third I picked up, not out of curiosity, but to end the call. Her voice was hesitant and fragile. "Kieran." I didn't speak. "I didn't know you'd react like this," she said. Fear and panic made me think we were done. But I was wrong. "You got married the next day. I told you straight out. You didn't panic, you planned. That wasn't how it was supposed to go. You left me in a hospital bed while I was pushing out your son. I cut you off. There is no way that makes sense, not even in hell." I could hear her breathing, and the soft creak of the chair she was curled up in. It might have been the couch in the hotel room she was probably staying in right now. She might have thought she could fix this. "I want to see Ezra," she whispered. "No, you don't get to want now. You had that chance, but you gave it up for perfume and a stranger. I didn't know you were rich, powerful, and set for life." I laughed. "Right. You didn't know because you didn't ask." I hung up before she could answer, and then I blocked her. That was the last time I heard Tanya's voice directly. After that, she was just a record, a lesson I'd never have to learn again. That night, I slept better than I had in months. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. I was standing in the kitchen with Ezra balanced on my forearm, and his bottle in the crook of my elbow, as he drank slowly, his eyelids fluttering. The stove beeped behind me, something boiling over, but I didn't care. I was looking at Ezra's face, that tiny crease in his brow when he drank like he was solving a puzzle. Then my phone rang. Private number. I almost turned it down, because I thought it was Tanya calling from someone else's phone again. I was trying something new, but something stopped me. I moved Ezra to my other arm, and swiped to accept. "Kieran," a soft, shaking woman's voice. "Not Tanya's." "Yes." "Who is this?" The other end had a shaky breath. "Tanya's mom, Martha, called." I didn't answer right away. The name hit me like a memory from a different time. I hadn't heard from her in years. She was always polite and quiet, never close but never mean. She looked like she was ready to be let down. I never thought she liked me much, but she was never mean. I asked Martha, "What do you want?" Her voice cracked. "I just found out about the birth and everything." I looked down at Ezra, who had fallen asleep in the middle of the bottle, and his lips were still slightly puckered. "How much do you know?" I asked. "She told me a version of things," Martha replied. "But something didn't feel right, so I asked around and then saw the video." I stiffened up. It was on video, and she tried to spin it. Kieran said, "You emotionally left her. She said she had no help." It was then that someone sent me a video clip from the cameras in the hospital lobby. "You're the only one with the baby? There is no one in the hallway. And the time is now." Again her voice broke. "She told you in a whisper that she left while you were giving birth. She really did leave." I didn't say anything. Martha went on, her voice getting clearer. "I was a better parent. I thought I did. Guy, I'm really sorry. I had no idea." I slowly sat down with Ezra close to me. He didn't move. He kept taking slow, soft breaths. The next morning she came back. I said in a low voice as a man put on my watch and a new ring on her hand. She called him husband. Oh my God. There was no sign of any trouble on her face. Like Ezra wasn't the price she had to pay to get away. The line went silent for a long time. Martha finally said, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. To let you know that I believe you. I'm sorry for what she did, for not calling sooner, and for thinking she was still the girl I raised. I told her she wasn't. Not any longer. I understand, but Ezra still has family here. You can call me at any time if he wants to talk to us. Thanks for that. And for what it's worth," she said, her voice getting stronger. "I told her not to fight for custody. I told her that if she did, she would be lying in court. And things would get worse. I didn't say anything about the words. She meant them. That much was clear. Thanks for calling, Martha." It took her a moment to say, "You're a better father than I ever gave you credit for." The line then went dead. I stayed there for a long time. Ezra pressed against me, and his weight made me feel stable. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I only felt the strange calm that comes from being seen for the first time. Thomas, my lawyer, called later that night. I picked up on the first ring. He said it right away. She's filed a custody motion, objecting to your request for sole guardianship. She says that she temporarily broke up with him because of emotional problems, but that she's now fully committed. I laughed. Yes, she is. She also wants to share access to the house. So she doesn't want you to change the locks, she says. She didn't agree to leave while she was giving birth either. Thomas said, I'm already writing our answer. You medical records, timestamps, and security footage from the hospital are all here for you. Kieran, she's not going to win this. She is going to try to look bad, though. I told them, don't worry. It makes me mad that she still thinks she has a case. Inconsistency is not a plus in custody hearings. Judges want things to be stable. As soon as she left, she handed it to you like it was gold. I took a quick look at Ezra. He's coming to stay with me. That can't be changed. Thomas's voice got softer. He will also let her argue with anyone she wants. The truth will not change in the end. When the call was over, I held Ezra a little tighter. It was silly to think that she would try to get back into his life after disappearing during his first breath. But it wasn't a surprise. Tanya never accepted what happened. Life seemed like a game to her. She knew how to bluff, bet, and raise, but she forgot that some players fold and others build empires in silence. I had done both. I put Ezra in his crib and watched him for a long time. His hands moved while he slept. No matter what, his chest rose and fell in time. The only court that mattered, and the only decision that mattered was this one. Was he sure he was safe? Did he feel loved? Yes. Tanya could do any kind of legal gymnastics she liked. She could cry on cue, wear white in court, and change her story to make me look like the bad guy. But she could never take back what she wrote. She didn't just leave. She left while I was cutting the birth canal to bring our child into the world. That was something that no court in this country would forget. It was colder than I thought the courtroom would be. Not in terms of temperature, but of power. It was very clinical. There are beige carpeting, smooth white walls, and benches. No one was there to do the right thing. They were there to follow the rules and do their job. A stage dressed up in government language. Ezra's stroller was next to me as I sat on the left side. He was sound asleep, wrapped in a navy blanket with cartoon stars. He had no idea that the air around him was tense and crackling. He might have, though. He might have been too smart to let it show. Tanya was across the room. Since the day I called security to take her and Liam from the hospital, I hadn't seen her. She was now sitting with her lawyer in a cream suit that was too bright for a custody hearing. Her hair was perfectly pinned back. Pearls are her go-to choice when she wants to look innocent. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she had practiced her face expression. She didn't look at me, though. It looked like she was about to ask Ezra for something she had never earned. The judge came in. First we stood, then we sat down. It was read in a voice that was too casual for what it meant. Then it began. Kieran Ashcraft-Toft, the petitioner, wants to have full legal and physical custody of Ezra James Ashcraft-Toft, who is a minor. Tanya Ashcraft-Toft is the respondent. Contest on the grounds of emotional distress and temporary absence. Both sides are there. Present, I made it clear. Present. Tanya spoke again, and her voice was very sweet. Thomas stood next to me, and was as calm as a doctor. A man named Finch, Tanya's lawyer, spoke first and painted a picture that made my stomach turn. He talked about stress, fear, and confusion after giving birth. My client was stressed out. She made a tough choice under a lot of stress, but she came back within 24 hours. Then that is not the same as abandonment. It makes people the same. The judge, a thin woman with tired eyes and silver streaks in her hair, nodded but didn't smile. She heard what was being said, but she didn't agree with everything. Then it was our turn. Thomas stood up slowly, and his voice was steady and calm. Your Honor, what the respondent calls a temporary absence, was actually her husband leaving her while she was working. Only a statement recorded by hospital staff of her telling Mr. Ashcraft-Toft, I can't afford to support a jobless man anymore. She left mid-contraction and returned married to another man. That is not stress. That is abandonment. Tanya's face showed a little wavering. The nurse who was there said she saw what happened, and her marriage license was still valid 23 hours after the baby was born. Thomas then turned to me and said, I didn't need a script. I was alone in that room when my son was born. I replied. She left while I was crying through contractions. I cut the cord myself, fed him, changed him, and registered his birth. She wasn't there emotionally, legally, or physically. She made her choice and I've made mine. I'm not keeping Ezra from his mother. I'm keeping him safe from a stranger. The judge gave a small nod and told the clerk to play the black and white security clip. I was in pain, hunched over in a hospital gown and holding my side. Tanya was near the door, purse in hand. Her voice didn't come through on the video, but her face did, flat and dismissive. She turned and walked away. For 37 minutes before Ezra's birth, the room became quieter. Tanya was crying when the lights came back on. Her lawyer put his hand on her shoulder, and she wiped her eyes with a lace handkerchief. But even from across the room, I could tell the tears weren't from regret. They were from anger. I made a mistake. I was scared, she sobbed. I believed he would not forgive me. I thought we were done, but I came back. Isn't that worth something? Finally, the judge leaned forward and linked her fingers. Mrs. Ashcraft-Toft, going back to the hospital with a new partner does not show that you are sorry. It shows completion on your terms. But terms don't matter when you're a parent. Consistency, dependability, and giving up things are important. She looked at me. Mr. Ashcraft-Toft, have you been taking care of the baby non-stop since it was born? Yes, sir. Do you know how to help him financially, emotionally, and physically? Yes. Do you mind if the mother has supervised visitation that will be looked at again in the future? Not at all. Truth and choice should be given to Ezra. But he needs to be stable first. The judge turned around and saw Tanya again. Do you know what the court needs to do? Tanya said, yes. Then here is what the court said. There was no pause or thought. When it comes to Ezra James Ashcraft-Toft's custody, the petitioner, Mr. Kieran Ashcraft-Toft, is given full legal and physical custody. Mrs. Respondent has the right to visit. Tanya Ashcraft-Toft will be supervised and looked over every 3 months. This decision will stand unless new evidence is shown that shows continued involvement and emotional stability. One last hit from the gavel. Tanya broke down. The sound of her sobs could be heard throughout the courtroom, but no one came to comfort her. Not her lawyer, not a friend, and not even Liam, who wasn't there. She knew that her world was closing in on itself. I didn't see her cry. I woke up Ezra with a soft yawn and turned to him. I got down on my knees next to him and kissed his cheek. I said in a whisper, "We're going home now." As I walked away, I thanked the judge and didn't look back. Reporters stood in the hallway and waited. Not for me. For Tanya. The video had gotten out. People were already reading about her in the news. A mother leaves her husband while she is in labor. It wasn't fed. I walked by Ezra with one arm around him and the other around my shoulder. I wasn't mad. I wasn't even the winner. I was free. That was 3 months after the custody decision. We moved to the coast. Me and Ezra alone. There were no lawyers, whispers, or lingering scents of Tanya's perfume on the walls. I picked a small town by the ocean, tucked between 2 cliffs. The houses were simple, the air smelled like salt and fur, and no one cared about the news. I wasn't the guy whose wife left him in the middle of labor. I was just Ezra's dad. We found a house with white shutters and a porch that went all the way around. A swing looked out over the water. The paint came off a little. I didn't mind that the floors were creaky in some places. It was true. Ours. I put Ezra to sleep in his crib and sat outside with a blanket over my shoulders the first night we stayed there. I listened to the waves crash below. I looked up at the clear, starry sky and thought of my uncle. I finally know what to do with everything you gave me. I didn't spend a lot of the 30 million. I didn't need to. As a child, I learned how to make pennies last longer, fix jeans instead of buying new ones, and boil rice 3 different ways when the pantry ran out. Old habits get better over time, not worse. But I did use some of it to make something that gave the pain a purpose. I started the Ashcraft-Toft Foundation 2 towns over in honor of my uncle. Its mission is to help single dads, caregivers who aren't getting enough help, and young parents whose partners broke up with them when life needed them to be strong. We gave them housing vouchers, legal help, support groups for their feelings, and programs to help them get back to work. That's why I hired that team. I went every week not because of the pictures, but because the stories made me feel like they were my own. Because every time a dad with a diaper bag and a look of worry in his eyes came through our doors, I thought of myself. Ezra got bigger quickly. He tried to sit up and talk like he had stories to tell by the time he was 6 months old. His laugh wasn't a sound. It helped. It took away all the scars Tanya left behind. I would sometimes sit and watch him play with his stacking cups or try to chew on the dog's tail. In a strange way, I would whisper thank you to him, to the universe, to my uncle, and maybe even to Tanya. The fire that burned away the rot was her leaving. I heard about her every once in a while. Since the court case, Tanya had moved twice. She started a podcast about getting better after a crisis, but it only lasted a few episodes before it stopped. Liam had been gone for a long time. He quietly quit Ashcraft Holdings and disappeared, leaving no one to recognize him. Tanya worked in stores for a while. There were boutique shops and interior design firms, but nothing stuck around. 3 times, she asked for shared custody. We all denied. I never replied. Not to be mean, but to be clear. She was no longer a part of our story. She was the badly written and torn out introduction. On a certain night, I took Ezra to the beach. By then it had become a habit. He would squawk at seagulls and try to grab the wind while I walked barefoot in the sand on my hip. He was brave and 10 months old. He wanted to walk before he could keep his balance. Was going to speak, but his tongue caught up. What a beautiful sunset that night. It was the kind of sunset that poets try to describe but always get wrong. The edges of the ocean are on fire, and gold is turning orange. Ezra moved around until I put him down. Then he waddled down the wet shore with his arms spread out like wings. His giggles carried on the wind. I sat down on the nearby bench and watched him. That time didn't need music, a filter, or someone to see it. It was great the way it was. You saved me, boy, I said out loud in a quiet, deep voice. As the tide lapped nearby, it seemed to whisper back, you gave me a reason to be calm. As he came back, his cheeks red and sand on his knees, he said, maybe it had. Maybe the universe speaks to those who finally stopped shouting. He walked back to me holding a seashell in one hand like it was treasure. I grabbed him and held him close. I said in a low voice, I don't care what they say. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and no one can change that. When I got home, I put him to bed and gently brushed his curls off his forehead. I read him a book and softly sang a song that my uncle used to hum to me. I then went to my office, opened the journal I had begun the day Tanya left, and began writing on the very last blank page. He smiled at the waves tonight. My son, my heartbeat, and I all agreed that I'm no longer healing. I'm whole. It was time to close the journal. I put it on the shelf next to framed pictures of Ezra's many firsts. First bottle, first laugh, and first day at the beach. There are no pictures of Tanya, just the truth. I could feel it when I turned off the lights and walked into my coastal home's peace. Not help, not fairness, but peace. The kind that doesn't knock. The kind you build yourself when someone breaks up with you in the middle of a contraction. The kind you get when you choose to rise fully, slowly, and quietly. Ezra woke up once while he was sleeping. I kissed his forehead as I leaned over. I told her, I'm here. All the time. This time, there wasn't a door ready to shut behind me. There is only one wide open one that faces the sea.